He thought he had built the perfect kingdom, but he didn't know this little girl would be his downfall. He has a secret world hidden behind walls, guarded by pyramids, surrounded by silence. He believed he was untouchable. He believed no one could ever escape him. But what he failed to realize was that one girl, one survivor, would gather the courage to speak, and her voice alone would bring his empire crashing down. This is the story of Dwight Malachi York, a cult leader who ran from the law, built a bizarre and isolated community in the middle of nowhere, and convinced hundreds of people that he was chosen by the universe. And this is the story of a little girl who refused to let her truth die inside her. In the late 1970s, York began his journey in Brooklyn, New York. He stood on streets and preached about spirituality, race, and cosmic destiny. He always changed his message to whatever attracted the most followers. To some, he was a prophet. To others, he was a revolutionary. But the reality behind closed doors was much darker. York slowly gathered control over families who trusted him. Rules became stricter. Outsiders were considered enemies. And children, like a girl named Niki, were told that he alone was their true father and protector. They lived under constant fear, always watched, always controlled. York didn't just preach, he rewrote reality. He told his followers that he was an extraterrestrial being sent from a distant galaxy to save humanity. He claimed he could speak to the dead, heal the sick, and predict the future. Parents who questioned him were separated from their children. Families who tried to leave were labeled traitors and threatened with spiritual consequences. He created a hierarchy where only those closest to him had any power, and everyone else existed in a state of submission and fear. People worked long hours without pay, building his vision while he lived in luxury. They gave up their homes, their savings, their freedom. And in return, he promised them salvation. Years passed, and rumors about the group spread across New York. Authorities became curious. The walls were getting closer, and so one night in 1993, York made a decision. Without warning, the entire community vanished from Brooklyn. They left behind homes, belongings, and neighbors who woke up to silence. York believed that if anyone was watching, they had now lost the trail. He moved everyone to Putnam County, Georgia, remote land where no one asked questions. There he built something shocking. A massive compound designed to look like ancient Egypt, pyramids, statues, bright golden symbols. A place he claimed was holy ground where his followers would be protected from the outside world. To the people who drove past, it looked like a strange tourist attraction. But to those trapped inside, it was a prison disguised as heaven. Families were cut off from society. Children were isolated from their parents. No hospitals. No schools outside the compound. Everyone existed to obey York. Niki was one of those children. She watched the world from behind fences, learning from painful experience that disobedience came with consequences. People feared York so deeply they forgot how to think for themselves. But deep inside, Niki knew what she was living through was a nightmare. She just didn't know how to escape it. One former member later recalled how York would gather children in secret rooms late at night. He told them they were special, chosen for a higher purpose. He convinced them that what he was doing was love, that it was spiritual teaching, that it was their destiny. He manipulated their innocence and twisted their understanding of right and wrong. And when they cried, he told them crying was weakness. When they resisted, he told them they were dishonoring their ancestors. He broke them down mentally and emotionally until they no longer knew how to fight back. Another survivor described how York had multiple wives, some as young as teenagers, who were told that marrying him was a sacred duty. These women were kept separate from one another, living in different parts of the compound, each believing they were uniquely chosen. They were not allowed to speak freely or leave without permission. Some tried to run, but they had no money, no identification, and nowhere to go. The outside world felt more terrifying than the prison they already knew. As the years went by, survivors managed to flee, one by one. They carried with them heartbreaking stories of manipulation and abuse. They were terrified, but they were finally free enough to speak, and their testimonies became a chain reaction. Calls were made, reports were filed, and investigators began quietly gathering evidence. The truth was slowly rising, and York had no idea. One of the most damaging testimonies came from a young woman who had been inside the compound since childhood. She described in horrifying detail how York would use religious teachings to justify his actions. He told the children that their bodies did not belong to them, that they were vessels for a greater mission. He said that pain was purification. He said that silence was loyalty. And for years they believed him. But when she finally escaped and spoke to investigators, her words became the foundation of the case against him. She was shaking as she recounted her story, but she did not stop. She knew that her voice could save others. Another survivor, a man who had been one of York's most devoted followers, came forward with a confession that stunned investigators. He admitted that he had seen the abuse happening. He had heard the cries. He had even participated in enforcing York's rules, believing that he was serving a divine purpose. But guilt had eaten away at him for years. He said he finally realized that he had been brainwashed, that York was not a prophet but a predator. And so he gave investigators names, dates, locations, and evidence that helped piece together the full scope of York's crimes. His testimony was crucial because it came from someone who had once defended York with his life. A few years later, authorities reached a breaking point. They had enough information to make a move. And so, at dawn on May 8, 2002, nearly 200 federal agents surrounded the compound from every direction. The cult members were shocked. York always said his power would protect them. He told them the outside world could never touch them. But the moment the gates were breached, his lies collapsed. York was arrested that day. The people he claimed to love learned the horrifying truth about his crimes. The world finally saw the darkness behind the pyramids. When he was brought to trial, witnesses took the stand. Children who had grown up with broken childhoods, adults who were once blinded by devotion, families destroyed by manipulation and fear. They spoke their truth publicly for the first time. And their bravery helped reveal the full scale of his crimes, a level of abuse and exploitation that shook the courtroom. One of the most emotional moments in the trial came when Niki herself took the stand. She was no longer a frightened child. She was a survivor ready to confront the man who stole her childhood. She looked directly at York and described everything he had done. She did not cry. She did not hesitate. She spoke with a strength that silenced the entire courtroom. And when she finished, the jury knew beyond any doubt that justice had to be served. The verdict was clear. Dwight York was sentenced to 135 years in federal prison. No pyramids, no followers, no control. Just concrete walls and a future he can no longer escape. After the trial, what remained of the compound was demolished. The pyramids were ripped apart. The statues were knocked down. The land was cleared, like erasing the memory of a nightmare. But the memories still lived in those who survived. And Niki, the girl who once felt voiceless, refused to let the story end in silence. She began rebuilding her life, turning pain into purpose. She founded a movement called What's Your Elephant? A community that encouraged people to speak the truth they've been too afraid to share. She uses her voice to help others find theirs. Because she knows something that every survivor must learn. Silence protects the oppressor. Speaking frees the survivor. A cult leader thought he could run away. He believed no law could touch him. He believed his victims would stay quiet forever. But in the end, the entire empire he built was destroyed by the people he once tried to silence. All it took was one little girl who refused to forget what happened. One voice. One truth. One act of courage. Because even the most powerful lies collapse the moment someone is brave enough to tell the truth.